founder and CEO of Tandem, which is a virtual office for remote teams. It's a desktop app where you can see who's online, you can get a sense for what they're working on, and you can talk and screen share in one click. So see who's around, talk in one click, and then also like jump onto the same page. We have some collaborative features as well. And, you know, I mean, I think that there, with all the companies, so in contrast to use it a ton, by the way, you know, we are the synchronous part of that workflow. So once you have the context front loaded, how do you then have the quick conversations, have the organic conversations, and also recover some of that water cooler chat that you would have in a normal office? I think that with a lot of companies making a really hard switch to remote, you know, maybe that explains the dramatic uptick we've seen. And to try and support all these companies, you know, we've waived fees for Tandem for the next few months. And you know, similar story to Vinay, like we've seen just intense scale, and it's really tested the team. But also, you know, we're learning a ton from our users and trying to make the product way better.
So how did you manage to handle the scale in the last months?
You know, I think I guess the short answer is we planned for it to some degree. You know, we've seen this scale before at previous projects, but it definitely, things broke that we weren't expecting to break, like small things. And so we had to really be on our game. And I think that in general, you know, we came out of it a lot stronger. You know, you plan for a certain amount of scale and exponential growth in this business, but it was unlike anything I've ever seen before.
So for context, how I know that friends of mine use Tandem a lot, and you might know who I'm talking about. It's a fund of two people, one of them being very distracted, very ADHD, and another person being really process focused and actually doing all the legal documentation. And I know that like the best way for them to collaborate is literally, okay, we do now a Tandem, I have everything prepared, and we go through everything and you let me know what I need to do, you know? So basically a decision moment in their case is like what they use Tandem for. Another friends of mine, they use it a lot for brainstorming. And I bet there's like multiple other use cases that you have seen in the last months. What are the typical use cases that customers tell you that work really well?
Yeah, so I think because we have this sense of presence, like you know who's online right now, you know who's talking with other people, you know, we show, you know, we do it in a very privacy conscious way. We always give you control over what you share with your team, but you know, a lot of teams will share what work app they're using. So we integrate with over 100 different work related apps. And so if you're, for example, if I see that Tim, my co-founder CTO, is switching between terminal and VS Code, then I know he's coding, he's in deep focus, maybe I shouldn't bother him. But the converse of that is if I see, you know, when we see that each other in Notion or Figma or Google Docs, it's a much more natural, you know, time to bug them or bother them or to say like, hey, I've got this idea, let's brainstorm on this together. So what we see a lot are, first of all, recovering that water cooler aspect. So people will create we have a concept of rooms where you can create different rooms for different topics. The second thing we see a lot is silent co-working, where people are in a room, video is small and out of the corner by default, in the corner by default, and we see people working together to get that sense of, hey, we're working at the same table. Sometimes it's accountability. Sometimes it's just the feeling of connection. Sometimes it's, hey, we're pairing on this project. Maybe we're both on Figma and kind of working silently with occasional engagement. Or like, hey, onboarding a new engineer, like we're just going to co-work for a bit. And then if you get stuck, I'm right there. And then the other thing we see is with brainstorms, you know, one of the things I heard Vinay's talking, one of the things that he mentioned is, hey, when you're doing sync conversations, it's helpful to have the context front loaded. And so one of the things we have, because we're showing the current app and we let you click to join the app, I'm not explaining this well. Let's see. It helps you bring all the context to bear on the conversation. So the way this looks is I've created a document and also a Figma file of a mock. And then also like maybe there's like a pull request that I want to kind of reference in this discussion. and I've shared all of this out. But when we actually have the talk, I can go onto the Figma document, and then the people I'm talking with in one click can join me there. I can go into Google, in one click they can join me. I can go into GitHub, in one click they can join me. So you can flow naturally between the collaborative tools and bring all the context to bear on the conversation.
This makes complete sense. Where do you personally see the product going?
So I think I see it, there's a ton of ways in which we integrate with workflows, but they're all centered around 3 key aspects. The first one is presence, seeing who's around and understanding who you can talk to. And one of the things that we found as we get sort of pulled into larger and larger organizations and companies is, there's a lot of need to improve the way we work. We integrate with existing systems, especially with the calendar and scheduling. And so that's a big area of work for us. And then the second aspect, after you see who's around, is talk in one click. And that's where we're doing a lot of things to figure out, like, for how you like to work, for how each person likes to work on their computer or eventually on mobile when we get mobile going. How do we make it so seamless to get into a call that it feels like you're sitting next to them? And that's, it's not one thing. There's not one silver bullet there. It's really understanding the different ways in which people work. Do they like keyboard shortcuts? Do they want the app to be accessible in different ways? And then the third aspect is jumping onto the same page. And that's where we think a lot in terms of the symmetry of things. So for example, if you're in person, I can ask to see your screen. Like you can turn your laptop to me and say, hey, take a look at this. Like, what's going on with this? And so we started building some of this symmetry. Like I can screen share with you, or I can also request your screen. And as we build the symmetry, what we find is more and more we're able to keep people in a sense of flow. Conversation flows between tools, between people. You can pull people in, pull people out. The ultimate vision is that working remotely or in a distributed way has the same flow, the same pace, the same spontaneity as working in person. Something that I think Vinay said really resonated with me about if you're working in an office and you want to talk with somebody in the office across the street, like let's say you're at Google or Facebook or Yahoo, right? Like that is essentially remote. And we all know that all 3 of us, we met at Yahoo, working on a previous project. And if we can really, part of why we're building this is we saw the need even when we were in a company that had offices.
Yeah, like every big company at some point is a remote team in denial.
Absolutely. I think the distinction is really blurred. It's like when you're a large company, you have salespeople traveling, you have people working from home, which I think we'll see a lot more of after this. You have different offices, you have teams on different floors even. One of the earliest teams using Tandem was at Autodesk, and they have people on different floors. And it's a cross-functional team, and it's easier to just have a quick chat on Tandem rather than like booking a meeting room, walking floor to floor.
How I kind of think about this, because like we usually think of remote as like binary, you're either a remote team or you're not, which is not really true. If you look at this more like as a, let's say, 2D space with like 2 axes, and one axis is saying how far away you are from the next headquarter, which means essentially how often do you meet people in person, And the second axis would be how distributed is the team that you specifically work with across time zones. And if you map out companies around that, you realize that a lot of companies actually have very, very different, I would say, remote setups, even within the same company. And a lot of companies that you associate with remote work are actually very, very different from other companies that you associate with remote work. So InVision has everybody on the same time zone. Google has team that work in Zurich together with in San Francisco all the time, So they have actually bigger asynchronicity problems as, for example, InVision would have, which you would associate with remote work, So it's very interesting how this deconstructs over the next few weeks and months and years. And even like large enterprises will realize that they are essentially remote in denial,
Absolutely, I totally agree, and I think that there's a silver lining to that, which is, again, I'm echoing things that Vinay said. The silver lining is that a lot of the processes that make remote work great are just processes that make companies great in general. And so with asynchronous stuff, there's a direct, it's the same tools. Remote is in person. With synchronous stuff, it's the same, you're still meeting for the same purposes, it's the same mechanisms, but the tools need to be different because you don't have all of the natural interactions that we've all trained ourselves to do in person. You don't have those when you're remote.
Makes sense to me. Let's quickly talk about the striped elephant in the room, Slack. So people currently, like I want to ping somebody really quickly, and the company already uses Slack. So I kind of will ping them maybe already in Slack, so they kind of own for a lot of companies this moment. What is your thinking around this? Like, would this mean on one extreme that on the long run, you will have to build a full alternative communication strategy for a company, including asynchronous and synchronous communication? Or do you think of more, no, there are specific use cases we want to focus on? Or do you think about it more, I would say, no, this has to exist parallel because it's different human behavior? Like, or how do you structure this for yourself?
Yeah, so we integrate with Slack. You can ping somebody on Slack via Tandem, and what will happen is it will say, hey, Andreas, I want to talk. And then we have a little sort of a snooze button where you can say, hey, give me 5 minutes. And so we hook into that, and we feel like Slack, we use Slack internally. We feel like it's a really essential part of communication. In our internal categorization, we think about it as semi-sync, or like somewhere between sync and async, because it can be real time, but it's not quite the same bandwidth as talking. I think that to be extremely reductive, people still use Slack in offices. And how you talk with your coworkers in an office, how you gather, how you meet, how you pull other people into a conversation, that is extremely complementary to Slack. And it really just depends on the situation. Somebody's in, and you see that emerging in Tandem too. If Tim's in deep focus and he's coding, I'm going to either, in some order, I'm going to either like send him a quick ping on Tandem, or DM him on Slack, or email him, schedule a meeting if it's really not urgent, right? So there's the urgency importance matrix.
So you essentially say that all of this behavior is perceived as one thing right now because it's kind of new human behavior, but over the long run, this will deconstruct into multiple areas where it's very natural to use different tools for each of them. Is this...
Absolutely. So in person, you have a range of expression available. And I can tap you on the shoulder. I can turn to you. I can just remark to the room. I can pull you aside into a conference room. I can book a meeting and book an hour. There's so many modes available, and we're trying to recover some of those modes online.
I have 2 more questions, and then Ashwin will kick us out, I guess. The first one is, Tandem is kind of famous for having a ton of integrations. You do, like, for example, monitor the desktop, what I'm actually using, and so on and so on. How do you think about feature development when it comes to horizontal stuff of like yet another tool you want to integrate with, versus going deep about, for example, changing the actual core tool and changing the actual core behavior? How do you split time? How do you, what's your framework or mental model you use here?
Yeah, it's half exploration, and then half, we have some first principles we're operating from. So the previous version of the product, we built our own document editor. So we've dipped our toes into trying to build our own modes.
Yes.
And what we realized was the value is in helping you talk with people and get between the apps that you find the most value in. So we're thinking about ourselves as to borrow a phrase, the meta layer of communication and collaboration.
Cool. Yeah, makes complete sense. Last question, and Ashwin is already like a little bit nervous and trying to. Very last question is, there's a ton of people right now in the audience, many of them potential founders. What kind of product would you like to see exist? What would be something you would work on if you wouldn't work on Tandem, or something that you would just feel it should exist or doesn't yet, or it could exist better?
Being able to make really close connections with close friends and family remote. Like all of us on the founding team have family that's far apart, different countries, different states, different time zones. Being able to make that remote connection, I think there's been some interesting new social apps out there. Like, House Party has seen a resurgence. There's the new Clubhouse app, but there's still a gap in a white space. And how do you make deep social connections? remotely. I think Cocoon is probably the most interesting approach I've seen so far. But I would love it. I would use I use every app that I come across with my family. I drag them kicking and screaming to try a new app. But I think it's hugely important. It's still a big problem.
Could you imagine spinning off a separate version of Tandem that focuses on this kind of social behavior, or is this like almost its own beast that has to be separate?
It's already being used that way. Not just me, because I want to test Tandem, but people play chess with good friends on Tandem and use it for different ways. I was using it to virtually turn pages for my brother, who's a pianist, as he was playing music. So I would turn pages for him. Like there are so many of these other use cases that are interesting and evolving. So we would consider it absolutely. But for now, we need to stay focused on the B2B enterprise use cases.
Awesome. Rajiv, thanks so much for your time. This was amazing.
Thanks,
thanks for coming.
Thank you, Rajiv, for coming in.